Alright, so we'll now continue our coverage of discrete time Fourier transform properties. So we have already covered the first four. The fifth property that I would like to talk about concerns differencing and accumulation. So these are the discrete time analogues of the differentiation and integration properties of the continuous time Fourier transform that we have studied before. Namely, that first we will see that if I start off with a signal xn, which has a dtft capital X of omega, the first thing we ask is, well, what is the discrete time Fourier transform associated with the differencing signal xn minus xn minus 1? Right? This is, of course, the discrete time equivalent of the derivative of x. Right? In this case, of course, it's easy using the properties that we have already seen, that the dtft is given by x of omega times 1 minus e raised to minus j omega. Right? This is, of course, a consequence of two properties that we have studied before. The linearity property, which is that the difference between these two signals would have a dtft, which is simply the difference between the dtft of the first signal and the second. And of course, the time shift property. When you shift the input signal by 1 unit of time, the output signal is basically the spectrum is basically the old spectrum multiplied by e raised to minus j omega. Right? So this is easy. This is simply the differencing property of the discrete time Fourier transform. Equivalently, I can ask what happens if I quote unquote integrate a discrete time signal. In other words, I take summation, let's say xk, k running from minus infinity to n. Alright? So this signal is basically capturing the running sum of x. Then I might ask, so this is of course the discrete time equivalent of the integral. So again I can ask, what is the discrete time Fourier transform of the running sum associated with x? Alright. Now, now you know that the running sum is essentially like the inverse relation, is the inverse operation associated with the differencing operation. Right? So a very natural guess about what the spectrum of this would be the following. I say x of omega divided by 1 minus e raised to minus j omega. Okay? Why is this a natural guess? This is a natural guess because when I difference a signal, I multiply its spectrum by 1 minus e raised to minus j omega. So you might naturally expect that when I do an accumulation or integration of the signal, then I should divide the spectrum by 1 minus e raised to minus j omega. However, as we have already seen in the case of the continuous time Fourier transform, doing this doesn't completely describe the spectrum of the integral or accumulation because it ignores the quote-unquote DC level associated with the accumulation. Right? So you would actually have a correction term here, which is in fact quite analogous to what we have seen before. Namely, that the correction is going to be in the form of an impulse at omega equals 0, which will have an intensity that is pi times the dtft evaluated at 0. Okay? So this is of course the intensity. I have to multiply this with an impulse at omega equals 0. But remember, the dtft is actually periodic with period 2 pi. So the impulse at 0 will be repeated at 2 pi, 4 pi, minus 2 pi, minus 4 pi, and so on. So really the representation becomes as follows. Omega minus k times, maybe I shouldn't use, yeah, it's okay, k times 2 pi, where k runs from minus infinity to infinity. Alright, so this is really the accumulation property of the discrete time Fourier transform. Namely, that when you take the running sum of a signal x, which has Fourier transform capital X, then the dtft of the accumulated signal is going to be the original dtft divided by 1 minus e raised to minus j omega plus a DC component. And the DC component is basically pi time is an impulse, of course, at omega equals 0, but also therefore at all multiples of 2 pi. Right? And the strength or the intensity of the impulse is pi times the dTft evaluated at 0. Okay, so these properties are essentially analogues of the kind of properties we have studied in the case of the Fourier transform itself. Let's see an example of how one might apply this. So suppose you look at the unit impulse in the case of discrete time. It's easy to see that the spectrum associated with the unit impulse is just a constant. So for all omega, the value is 1. Now, what this means is that if you now consider the accumulation signal of the unit impulse, that is, this is k running from minus infinity to n, the accumulation signal associated with the unit impulse is of course exactly the same as the unit step, right? And the unit step, according to the property that we have just seen, the accumulation property, would have a discrete time Fourier transform that is given by 1 divided by 1 minus e raised to minus j omega, right? Because the spectrum of the unit impulse is 1 plus pi times capital X of 0 is also 1. You would simply have impulses at all multiples of 2 pi. Right, and this is an important pair. It's an important DTFT and signal pair that you should be aware of. Right, and this would in this case be a natural corollary of the accumulation property that I have just mentioned before. Alright. Next, let's move on to another important property. This property is actually quite different from analogous properties that we have seen in the continuous time case. This is going to be the property of time expansion. Now, one thing I should note is that in continuous time, we have already seen the duality between stretching in one domain and squeezing in the other. In other words, when I scale the signal in time to stretch it, then that would result in the spectrum getting squeezed by the same factor and vice versa, right? These are two dual properties that we have studied. Now I want to understand a discrete time variant of time expansion. Okay, so how do I pull the samples of the discrete time signal apart? That's really the question. Okay, so let me illustrate by means of a diagram. So suppose I consider the discrete time signal xn, which looks like this. Okay, suppose the support is just from 0 to 2, right, and all of the other values are just 0. Now, a natural question to ask is, what does it even mean to say that you want to expand this signal in time, given that it is in discrete time, right? Intuitively, that means that, you know, these samples that you see, you want to kind of stretch out the gap between these samples, right? So a natural way of coming up with a stretched signal is the following, okay? So at 0, I continue to define the signal at the same value, but the value at 1, I push it to 2. Similarly, the value at 2, I push it to 4. Alright. Now the question is, well, at these intermediate points where I have quote-unquote holes, what do I do? Right? The easiest thing to do would just be to pad these things with zeros. Just to make sure that my figure looks on the same scale, let me just mark out the intensities, so that so this would be an example of time expansion, and I'm going to call this x subscript 2 of n. Why do I say x subscript 2? Subscript 2 means that I have pushed the samples, well, twice apart, right? I have created a gap such that the samples in the original signal are pushed twice as apart as they were in the original signal, right? More generally, I could push them k times apart. So more generally, I could define the time expanded signal as follows. So for k, let's say greater than or equal to 2, xk of n is defined as follows. It is x of n by k if n is a multiple of k. In other words, the remainder of n when I divide by k is 0, and otherwise it is 0. Right? So my expanded signal takes the same values as my original signal, except that the original samples get moved k time steps apart, and all of the intermediate values basically become 0. In other words, if you look at this signal is going to be potentially non-zero only for those values of n which are multiples of k. So what I have done so far is basically give you one way of doing a stretching in time or an expansion in time for discrete time signals. So then the question becomes, how do I go about computing the discrete time Fourier transform associated with the stretched or expanded signal? Okay. So let me do this for the special case of k equals 2, and you will see that basically the same principle applies generally as well. Okay, so you're going to see something like the following. So if I look at capital X2 of omega, this is the spectrum associated with the time expanded signal with k equals 2. Okay, this is then going to be, let me just write out the original formula to begin with. X2 of n e raised to minus j omega n, of course, summation over all n. Alright, this is of course summation x of n by 2, right, e raised to minus j omega n. But importantly, in the second summation, it's only the even valued n that will actually play a role, because for all odd valued n, x2 of n is just 0. So which means this summation is only over n even. Right? Then I can just do a, shall we say, change of summation index where I replace n by 2 to n, and then I would have something like summation xm e raised to minus 2 j omega m from minus infinity to infinity. Right? So when I replace n by 2 by m, in that case, well, I now have a summation which actually runs over all integers m. And if you stare at this, you will see that this is exactly the same as capital X of 2 omega. Alright? So more generally, you would have the following property. Xk of omega is x of k omega. Okay, so this is my property, and you can see that the ideas are somewhat similar. What is x of k omega? X of k omega is the same spectrum that you began with, except that it is squeezed by a factor of k. Just as x of 2 omega is basically a spectrum which is a squeezed version of the original spectrum by a factor of 2. Okay, so in this manner we see that there is an analog between the properties we have studied in continuous time and discrete time, namely that if I stretch in time, now unlike in continuous time, I have to tell you what I even mean by stretching in time for discrete time signals. So in particular, if I stretch in time in this particular manner, right, where I move the samples apart and plug the intermediate holes with 0. So if I stretch in time in this manner, then the spectrum basically gets squeezed by the same factor. So if I stretch in time by a factor of k, the spectrum gets squeezed by a factor of k. Okay, so that is my time expansion property. So there are superficial structural similarities with what we have studied in continuous time, but the actual property itself is quite different, simply because time expansion, squeezing and stretching of time is much more complicated in discrete time as compared to continuous time. Okay, so that's property number 6. So now let's move on to property number 7. Property number 7 is quite familiar to us. This is simply Parseval's relation. Parseval's relation is, of course, basically just an analog of Pythagoras theorem, right? So I'm just going to state it here because we have actually used it and in fact proved it on multiple occasions in the past. So what it tells you is that if you look at the mod square of the signal in time, summed from minus infinity to infinity, this is exactly the same as 1 by 2 pi times integral of mod x omega square from 0 to 2 pi. Okay, so therefore it basically equates the energy of the signal in the time domain to the energy of the signal in the frequency domain, right? Except that the way you calculate the energy in time domain is through a summation of mod square because it's discrete time, whereas in continuous time, whereas in the frequency domain, because my spectrum is a periodic continuous time signal, I do this via an integral over one period, which is in this case written as 0 to 2 pi of the mod square of the spectrum. Okay, so this is Parseval. The way you prove this is in fact identical to the way we've been proving Parseval's relation for all of the other Fourier related transformations. So I'm going to skip going through the argument itself here. Next we move on to what is perhaps the most important property so far as our understanding of LTI systems is concerned, and this is of course the convolution property. Okay, so the convolution property is stated as follows. So if I have one signal xn which has a spectrum or dtft capital X of omega, another signal yn which has spectrum capital Y of omega, then I ask what is the spectrum associated with the convolution between x and y. And as you should expect by now, the spectrum of the convolution is simply the product of the spectrum of the two signals. In other words, when I do a convolution in the time domain, so far as discrete time signals is concerned, then you end up seeing a multiplication in the frequency domain. Okay, again, this is a property that we have actually been through many times in the past. So we have also in fact seen proofs many times in the past. But because this is arguably the most important property to study here, let me quickly remind you how it is that one goes about proving this. So let's denote the convolution signal between x and y by, let's say, z. Okay, so I'm interested in looking at what is the spectrum of z. By definition, the spectrum of z is given by summation zn e raised to minus j omega n, summation being over n. Right? Now if I substitute z from the convolution, then I have an outer summation with respect to n and an inner summation, let's say, with respect to l of xl y of n minus l. Right? This much by itself is the value of the convolution signal z at time n, right, times e raised to minus j omega n. Now, by now you should expect what is going to happen next. What I'm going to do is interchange the ordering of the summation. So I'm going to first do the summation over over L over n. I'm going to do the inner summation with respect to n and the outer one with respect to L. Okay, so let me put together everything that depends on n. So I have y of n minus L times e raised to minus j omega. Let me also write this as n minus L and I'll compensate for that by multiplying by an additional e raised to minus j omega L times XL. Okay. Then of course you see that if you look at this inner summation, this summation is simply what it is required to compute the spectrum of Y, because n minus L, a summation over all n, whether n minus L is replaced by just n wouldn't make a difference, right? So what is inside is simply Y of omega, which of course doesn't depend on L, so it comes out, times XL e raised to minus j omega L. Now once you pull this guy out of the summation, you will see that whatever is left is simply the spectrum of x. So therefore you have x of omega, I of omega. Right? So this is the standard playbook that we adopt for proving all of these kind of properties. Moral of the story here is that exactly as it has been in many of the other Fourier transformations that we have studied, when I do a convolution in the time domain, it results in a multiplication in the spectral domain. Alright, so let us now see what the implication of this is from the standpoint of LTI system. So remember, my property is the following. If I take the convolution of x and y, spectrum of that is in fact simply the product of the spectra of the original signals. Right? What this means is that if I take a signal x and push it through an LTI system whose impulse response is h, and if I denote the output signal by y, then we know that yn is simply the convolution between x and h. And what the convolution property tells you is that if I look at the spectrum of the output signal, it is the spectrum of the input signal times the spectrum of the impulse response. In other words, so far as LTI systems are concerned, even in discrete time, LTI systems can be viewed as essentially some sort of equalizers, right? We talked about this analogy before, where you basically take you can think of the operation that the LTI system does is that it basically applies a frequency specific gain to the input signal. So this is the input spectrum at frequency omega. Corresponding to omega, there is a frequency dependent gain, a complex valued gain that your LTI system provides, which is analogous to basically equalization, right? Where you basically take different frequencies of your music signal and either you amplify them or attenuate them. Here the amplification or attenuation is via a complex valued signal. The spectrum itself is complex valued. But really what you're doing is applying a frequency specific gain to your input signal. That is really the way to think about LTI systems in the spectral domain. Okay, so we will do many examples of these kind of LTI systems in discrete time going forward. But at this point, maybe the most natural example to consider is the ideal low-pass filter. This is something that I talked about earlier when it comes to the frequency shift property anyway, but let's revisit the ideal low-pass filter in discrete time. Now, the ideal low-pass filter in discrete time can be thought of as follows, right? The spectrum associated with the ideal low-pass filter would look like this. Okay, which is all the more apparent from the convolution property that we have studied. What the ideal low-pass filter would do, I'm restricting my understanding of my view of the spectrum to be from omega running from minus pi to pi. What it would do is retain all the frequency components of the input signal that lie from frequencies minus omega c to omega c, where this omega c is of course your cutoff frequency. Okay, and basically will blank out all the components of the signal at all other frequencies, specifically from omega c to pi and from minus pi to minus omega c. Okay, so this is given the convolution property, this is of course the natural spectrum that you should associate with an ideal low pass filter. So this is an ideal low pass filter. Now, if I want to understand now the ideal low pass filter in the time domain, this is of course the spectral representation of the ideal low pass filter. Then what I need to do is compute the inverse Fourier transform of this spectrum, right? That would in fact be the impulse response. So h of n, so let's actually put LP for low pass. H of n is of course given by 1 by 2 pi times the integral HLP of omega e raised to j omega n d omega. This is from 0 to 2 pi. Right? So this is the formula for computing the inverse discrete time Fourier transform associated with the spectrum of the ideal low pass filter. Right? This of course now boils down to 1 by 2 pi times the integral from minus omega c to omega c of e raised to j omega n. Okay, and the rest of the calculation I will leave it to you. You guys are more capable of doing this without making mistakes than I am. So I'm just going to write out what the answer in this case works out to be, and it works out as follows. So it's sine of omega c, the cutoff frequency, times n divided by pi n, right? Which, if you recall from our continuous time experience, is basically like a sync signal, right? So it's like a discrete time sync. Right? So it's sine of cutoff frequency times n divided by pi n. Okay? Now this is the impulse response of the ideal low pass filter. If you stare at the impulse response, you conclude that many of the things that we said about the ideal low pass filter in continuous time also hold in discrete time. Namely, that this is not something that one would actually be able to implement in practice. Why is that the case? Well, for one, it has infinite support. Right? So it's you need to perform a convolution in time with an impulse response which has infinite support, right? Which means that your convolution system needs to have infinite memory, right, to be able to perform this. And it's also not causal. So this is not something that can be performed in real time, simply because the value of the output of the low pass filter at any time depends on the future values of the input as well, and not just all, some future values, all future values. Alright, so that's the reason why the ideal low pass filter is not implementable in practice. Right? So in practical situations, exactly as we said in continuous time before, you will work with approximately low pass filters, which means the response will not be exactly flat and the cutoff will not be exactly as perfect. But the trade-off for non-ideal spectral, shall we say, performance is going to be something that is more implementable in practice. Alright? So that's the example I wanted to cover so far as the ever important convolution property is concerned. There is one more property that I want to talk about, which would be the dual of the convolution property, which is the multiplication property. So in the convolution property, we saw that when I do convolution in the time domain, that results in multiplication in the frequency domain. So now the natural question to ask is, if I do multiplication in the time domain, well, what happens to the spectrum? Now, recall that the DTFT associated with each of these signals is inherently continuous time and periodic with period 2 pi. So therefore, I should not expect, the spectrum to involve a full-blown convolution between the spectrum of x and y, because you cannot really convolve meaningfully periodic signals, right? So what you should expect instead is some sort of periodic convolution to actually show up, and that is in fact exactly what happens. The spectrum associated with the multiplication of x and y is 1 by 2 pi times an integral of the form x of theta, y of omega minus theta d theta, where the integral is going to be over one period, let's say 0 to 2 pi. Okay, so which means that, so this is in fact what we called periodic convolution before. Right? So what we see here is that when I do multiplication in the time domain with discrete time signals, then you end up with a periodic convolution between the spectrum of the original signals. Alright? So the proof would of course be very analogous to the proof of the convolution property that we just did. So I'm going to leave the proof as an exercise. Okay? So that basically almost wraps up the properties of the discrete time Fourier transform that I'd like to discuss. The last property that we have to talk about is actually duality, which is something that I will talk about in the next video. All right.